So one of the things that I like about Bitcoin, or at least this Bitcoin, is that I can do things like this without worrying about it. Because this is not actually gold. It's just made to look like gold. The Bitcoin ETF, BITO, launched today, and if you're wondering if it might change the way people look at Bitcoin and even gold, you're probably not alone. For anyone uncomfortable buying, holding, or selling Bitcoin directly, well, an ETF that you can buy using your current stock trading platform will probably be a lot more interesting simply because it's easier to buy. Now, personally, I think of BITO a lot like I think of the gold and silver ETFs that aren't fully allocated. SLV is a really good example where you're buying the performance of futures contracts rather than the asset itself. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a minute, but to a lot of people that just won't matter. They'll focus instead on how it's just easier to buy it and forget about it. And I think that's where this gets relevant, because if an ETF is easier to buy within a trading platform, well, then it's easier to consider that asset to be a hedge in your portfolio, a lot like people think of gold today. Now, I'm not saying that I think that it's going to affect the price of gold, but if the ETF option puts Bitcoin into that new category as a hedge, well, that brings us back to the Bitcoin versus gold debate. That's kind of a contentious topic for some, but I'm not here to try to convince anyone to go with one or the other. I like them both, but I like them for very different reasons. Now, right now, Bitcoin just seems too volatile for me to suggest buying it, even though I do buy it myself. I haven't really been buying Bitcoin lately, but I hold a fair amount. I'm personally a lot more interested in altcoins and DeFi staking, but that's going to be every bit as volatile as Bitcoin, probably more. When BITO came out this morning, I did buy a little bit, and it was interesting to me that my investment platform asked me to change my risk profile to aggressive before it would even let me purchase the ETF. I've been trading for a long time, and that's the first time I've seen anything like that. Now with gold, if you're already here, you know that I'm a big fan of it. I buy it all the time. And mostly we're talking about physical here, not the ETFs. I just think that there are a lot of reasons to get in the habit of buying physical gold. And I'm a lot more comfortable talking about gold here because it has enough history to be proven. But I don't actually pit the two against each other at all. I like Bitcoin and gold for different reasons. Gold is defensive, Bitcoin is aspirational. Same goes for those altcoins, same goes for those DeFi models. I definitely don't invest in them because of their history. I don't invest in them for stability. I invest in them on the hope that they'll go up. So why do we care here? I think first of all, just having an ETF gives a lot of people an easier choice to decide between gold and Bitcoin as their portfolio hedge. And I think it gets interesting down the road as well. I mentioned that I like gold for the defensive reasons. It's a stable backup. It's a hedge. It's off the radar. And I also like the idea of being able to hand it down to my kids someday. And somewhere along the way, I guess I started wondering if I should be holding some Bitcoin as well. Again, just to give that to my kids somewhere down the line. Now, I don't think of it as much like an inheritance where they get it when I'm gone, but more like something that I could give to them 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, maybe 20, whatever. And in that case, I wonder a little bit about which they might prefer. A few days ago, I ran a poll and I asked, what would your kid, real or imaginary, prefer, gold or Bitcoin? And of the 2,000 people who responded, 71% said gold, 29% said Bitcoin. Not a huge surprise considering we're a biased group. This is a channel about gold, but I did think that they would be a little bit closer because we're talking about a younger generation. We're talking about kids. A few interesting things though came up in the comments of that poll, and one of them was just that our kids are going to prefer what we teach them to prefer. Now in my experience, unfortunately, kids don't always agree with their parents. It's a good point though, and personally I want to make sure that my kids understand both. Another thing that comes up pretty much anytime I mention Bitcoin is that buying Bitcoin is gambling. And to get no arguments from me there, I actually agree with that. There's some interesting science though behind gambling that says that a person gets the dopamine hit on the verge of the bet, not once they win. So if you think about that, your lizard brain isn't excited pulling money out of Bitcoin, it's excited when you put money into it. And that might explain a little bit about why a lot of the people that I know who are invested in Bitcoin haven't actually pulled out profits. And that's actually where I think Bitcoin and gold really work well together. So you have to humor me just for a moment here. Gold is exciting once you get it in hand. So if you are able to take the profits out of an investment like Bitcoin and then lock it in with gold, it's actually a really smart cycle. You can take your wins and then you can lock them in and protect them. And if I haven't already said it, I think it's important to actually have stable assets like gold before you get into those investments that feel a little bit like gambling to begin with. So the reason I jumped in on this topic to begin with is that I spotted a few mentions of how the Bitcoin ETF was going to take a run at gold's position as the safe haven. And I think the idea there was that because it would be easier to buy the ETF, it would become more mainstream. And there's definitely less buyer friction. I think that it's possible that a person might decide to buy the BITO ETF rather than a gold ETF like GLD. But if you look at this at all, gold is the ultimate safe haven asset, has been for years and years. BITO isn't really an asset at all. The ETF hypothetically gives you exposure to Bitcoin, and yes, it's easier to buy, but the ETF bets on the price fluctuations of Bitcoin rather than giving you any kind of stake in Bitcoin itself. So if you buy BITO, you don't buy the underlying asset, you actually buy the trading differential on Bitcoin futures. So if you're one of the people who doesn't like SLV because it's not fully allocated against physical silver, well, BITO is a lot worse. And to take that one step further, the ETF market is not only much bigger than Bitcoin's actual market cap, the money that goes into BITO never actually makes its way into Bitcoin at all. The ETF isn't actually directly allocated. So again, BITO is based on the price fluctuations rather than the value of the asset itself. So even though BITO will probably send the price of Bitcoin up in the short term, it doesn't actually increase Bitcoin's value by buying it directly. So it's hard to see how any of this has any real potential to dethrone or even depreciate gold over any period of time. Personally, I think that any push toward digital currencies becoming more mainstream will really only make physical assets more important. Right now, gold is seen as a hedge against the devaluation of fiat currencies, where in the future, maybe it's also a hedge against electronic currencies, since there's just more that can go wrong. Let us know what you think, though. I'm curious if you're buying the Bitcoin ETF and then whether or not you think there's any direct impact on the price of gold. And while you're there, hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed if you like the topic of gold and silver. If you're still here, thank you again for watching. Always appreciate your time. Take care. Okay, one more thing. We don't actually have Flex of the Week around here, but Bill Dalton posted something on the Discord server that I just think is impossible to ignore. Now there's a lot going on in this photo. You need to ignore the driver that's kind of cropped out here anyway, and the tactile turn pen, the wildflower leather journal cover, the sheath. And that is a Holt Bladeworks Spectre. That alone would make this photo great. But if you look in the upper left, you've got a 2015 North Korean gold horse. It's very possible that Bill has the only gold horse in all of Canada. Now, if you're watching, Bill, earmuffs for a second, because we joked about how bad the North Korean coins were, but we couldn't overlook the fact that some things are just so bad that they're kind of great. And horse is one. It kind of hit legendary status in the Discord server, and Bill actually found one. And it's very possible that Bill is an international spy and he used those skills to get a hold of them, but however he got it, I'm very impressed. There are only 8 or 9 of them in the PCGS population. So nice work, Bill. It's going to be tough to top that one. If anyone out there wants to hop in on the Discord server, there's always an invite in the description. We'd love to have you. This photo came from the Desk Dumps channel. It's just kind of a fun way to show what you're picking up. Okay, that's it for real. Take care.